What's up guys, Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with a quick player breakdown. One I'm actually really excited to bring you because this is one of my favorite players. This player is Martavis Bryant of the Pittsburgh Steelers. One thing about Martavis Bryant is between Nick and I, we have completely different opinions on this player. I am very high on Martavis, where Nick would not even touch him. So keep that in mind. Before I jump into the player breakdown for Bryant, I just want to let you know, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Also, hit that like button. We post videos 5 days a week. That's not going to stop until the season starts. If you haven't already, check out our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And while you're there, download some rankings. That's enough about that. Let's jump into the breakdown for Martavis. So who is Martavis Bryant? He is a player, if you ask me, who has high-end wide receiver 2 upside, but he has an extremely low floor. He has basically a highlight reel if you go back and look at all of his catches throughout the 2014-2015 seasons, because remember, he was suspended all of last season. That actually is one of the main contributors to why he has such a low floor. He could literally be suspended at any time and have a Josh Gordon-esque exit from the NFL. One thing to keep in mind though is that all the reports coming out of training camp are great. Ben Roethlisberger has been talking him up, where in the past Ben has been super critical on Bryant. Bryant also was able to put on about 10 to 15 pounds of muscle, and where most players, they say it but you can't really see it, you can really notice it on Bryant's slender 6'4" frame. That's kind of where he stands right now, but let's talk about where he has been in the past leading into this 2017 season. So his rookie campaign, he played in 10 games and averaged 13 fantasy points per game in PPR scoring his rookie season. 2015, his sophomore campaign, he did not hit that sophomore slump at all. He hit the ground running, averaging 14.7 points per game in 2015. If you translate that to 2016 numbers, 14.7 points per game would have been good last year for wide receiver 13, ahead of Amari Cooper. So that's where you kind of get that high-end wide receiver 2 upside I was speaking on earlier. Now, like I said, those are PPR points that I'm mentioning, so you can imagine for a player who has an extremely long yards per catch average and a player who also only averages 4.5 receptions per game is a much better standard play. Just for a little reference, Amari Cooper, who we said would have been right behind him in 2016 with the same points per game average, averages over 5 receptions per game. Clearly, this makes Bryant a better standard play, but in PPR, he still has some value as well. Players who are known to be better standard play, normally it means they're boom or bust. Players like Deshaun Jackson, Brandon Cooks, Sammy Watkins, these are all examples of players who are known as standard players. They commonly rely on big plays and do it with few receptions. One thing that makes Bryant different though is, let's break down his 2015 fantasy points on a per game basis. When you're talking about standard players, normally they flip-flop from large games to very minimal games, and the production's really all over the board. Now, starting in 2015, his first game he had 31 points, then he had 13, 8, 12, 26, 12, 21, 12, 18. Then in his final 2 games, he had 1 point and then 1 point. Clearly, you can see at the end of that, he had 2 completely dud weeks. Nothing can explain for that. But up until those final 2 games, Bryant was averaging an astounding 17 fantasy points per game. Now, you could say he was a little across the board when you have games where he has 31 points, 26 points. Those are monster performances. But if you give me a player whose minimum when he's involved in the game is 8 points, that's pretty consistent to me. Now, he did have those 2 games where he had 1 fantasy point total, and we're not in the business of simply throwing games out. Those are the types of games that Bryant can have, and that does make him a little riskier than your average player. One thing that is worth noting in those 2 games is that he only received 3 targets in each of those games, whereas previous low on the whole season prior to that was 7 targets. The point I'm trying to make is, most players that are better in standard scoring have a rap for being inconsistent game to game. Just because Bryant is a better standard play doesn't mean that he's going to be inconsistent throughout the whole season. He may have bigger swings than most players, but he will not be the dud on your team week by week. One thing that is safe to say is that the Steelers are going to immediately give him his usual target share in 2017, which is actually an average of about 8 targets per game. If you think about it, it makes sense. Who's going to challenge him for these targets? Eli Rogers? Sammy Coates? I don't think so. Both of those players were given the opportunity and they really fell flat on their faces. It's a fact. The Steelers win more games with Bryant when he's on the field. With him on the field, they're 15-6. Without him, they're 17-10. Now, the splits aren't huge, but that offense runs on all cylinders when Bryant is on the field. Even Antonio Brown has better stats when Bryant is there, which is surprising. Bryant actually helps by taking some coverage away from Antonio Brown, so they both can make plays. So as you can see, there's clearly a lot of upside with picking Martavis Bryant this year. But where do the downsides come in? Well, clearly he has a problem committing to football. He has been suspended 2 years, including last year, full 16 games. One more suspension could definitely land him in Josh Gordon territory. This means in dynasty leagues, you shouldn't overpay for this player. He is relatively unproven and has one of the highest risks of being out of the NFL than any other player. It's known around that Steelers locker room that his commitment is definitely in question, and it's completely understandable. Then factor in how rusty can a player coming off of a year off really be. Bryant, unlike other players coming back from suspension, he had a problem with his catch rate. His first 2 years, his catch rate was 53% and 54%. That's on an extremely low side of the spectrum, because a player like Michael Thomas, who had a high end of a catch rate, had 76. So when you're comparing 53 and 54% to 76%, you really just can't do it. It's not comparing apples to apples. Martavis Bryant is a deep play specialist, so you do have to factor that in when considering that his catch rate will be a little bit lower, but his drop rate has always been higher than average. In 2015, he dropped 9 passes, which was literally 10% of his entire target share. If you're saying 1 out of every 10 catchable balls you're going to drop, that's really just not good at all. Then you factor in he's a year off. We could really have some trouble when he's shaking the rust off. Playing devil's advocate though, you could go the opposite way and say if he cleans up his drop rate, if he's completely focused, he's completely committed, him and Ben Roethlisberger are on the same page, and he cleans up his drop rate, that's an additional 10% of production he could instantly get as a boost. So as you can see, the ceiling for this player is really high. The floor is just creeping lower and lower. Now, if he doesn't improve that drop rate, even though he will undoubtedly start the season as a wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh, if he does struggle with his drop rate and to get open and to catch his targets, I can guarantee you that that target share will diminish, and it will diminish quickly. Now, for those reasons, Nick is completely staying away from him. Obviously, the fact that you're a living highlight reel means that a lot of players are going to want to own you. That's actually one of the main reasons why I like Martavis Bryant so much. I like to own, and I've said it before, I like to own players that I like to watch. It makes it fun for me on Sundays, makes it fun for me on Mondays and Thursdays when I have a player in my fantasy lineup who I'm excited to watch and get some big play potential. The only problem with that is now his ADP is just through the roof. Right now, he stands at pick 47 in Fantasy Football Calculator and pick 62 in ESPN. Frankly, pick 47 is too high. It's much too high for me. Even though I'm one of the biggest Bryant supporters, I would not take him at pick 47. That slots him out at wide receiver 22. It's not that I don't think he can exceed value at wide receiver 22. It's just that for a player that brings a lot of risk to bank on as a sure thing, it's not smart to do that in that early of a round. It's not that I don't think he can exceed value at wide receiver 22. It's just that he brings a lot of risk to the table to bank on something that's really not a sure thing. If I'm taking someone at pick 47, which is the back of the 4th round in a 12-team league, I want either wide receiver 1 upside, which could be argued, but there are just so many other picks in that area that are better and more safe for my team. There are rosters you can construct that'll make that a good fit, but I would like to get more value from that. Now, where ESPN has him, I can actually work with 62 overall there. That's wide receiver 28. I can guarantee you if he plays 16 games, doesn't struggle with drops, he will definitely exceed value at that draft point. However, you do know the concerns are real. I love the pick if you're drafting him there. I think it's fair. I think it leaves room for you to draft safe picks around him. That way you minimize the risk in your wide receiver core, and you still have that upside factor with Bryant getting you 100+ yards and multiple touchdowns. So what's the verdict? I say Bryant can definitely be your team's high upside guy, but you definitely have to make sure that you negate the risk by drafting safe picks around him. That's going to do it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a quick one. We're going to be doing a few more of these player breakdowns on players that you guys are asking about us in the comment section, in the Facebook group. We'll try to get to as many as we can until the season starts. If you have a player you want us to break down, leave it in the comment section. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.